going to start this meeting just by acknowledging that we are meeting here on stolen land, the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri, and new to the country. So I want to just pay my respects to those elders and acknowledge that the First Nations people went through a genocide on this country and have been suffering since to reclaim their connection to country and reclaim their home. And the colonisation that happened here is a big part of the problem that we face. And so there's no facing justice for the climate without acknowledging the justice for First Nations people. And so I want to show my solidarity with their struggle and always encourage rebels to attend events run by First Nations people, and especially First Nations youth, who are the carriers of culture that has been lost. Where I'm from in Melbourne, we've got a really strong contingent of SEED, which is Indigenous youth, and WAR, Warriors of Aboriginal Resistance. And I'm sure that there's groups around here. Does anybody know of one around here that works as well? Yeah?
There's the Ngunnawal Youth Council.
Ngunnawal Youth Council.
They were pretty instrumental in organising the last Black Lives Matter action.
Fantastic, great, thank you. So we can look up their socials, make sure we like and follow those. And also I want to acknowledge that we are here in a time of climate and ecological emergency, where the habitability of our planet is at stake, and we have a duty of care, a responsibility to protect our planet for ourselves and for generations to come. And you, for turning out today, are the front line of that. And great. Thank you all for being here, and want to acknowledge that that takes a lot of strength and courage to turn up to one of these meetings just on its own. So, because it means facing what we're facing and feeling those deep earth emotions. So thank you for sharing that with everybody here, and the people in this room are your greatest allies. So look around and feel love and respect and gratitude. What we're going to ask you to do today out of this meeting is something very big. We're going to ask you to do something that's proportionate to the threat that we face. And before we do that, we're just going to re-ground ourselves in a little bit of the science of what we are facing, and then we're going to look at the social science of how to make effective change. So Extinction Rebellion is based off social science. We look at movements in the past that have been successful in the fast change that we need and how to achieve that. So I'm going to hand over to Mark to talk a little bit about what we're facing, just to ground ourselves, and then Andy will take the second bit, and then I'll jump back up and make that big ask of you. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you. All right. No further rosy songs from me, I'm afraid. I have bad news. So, I just want to go over to start with, what do we know? Why are we here? What do we know? We know that carbon emissions emitted in large scale over time will cause the global temperature average to rise. We know that these emissions form the basis of our economy, our transportation, our production networks, and we know that carbon emissions have been rising year on year since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We know that the world is already too hot. We're seeing what that means already, right? Well, we've just had heat waves kill over 100 people in North America. We've just had wildfires in California, which seem to rage every year. We've just had floods in New South Wales that made their way down here too. And in the last month, we've had floods in Europe that have killed over 150 people. Now, because we're a very Western white society, these are the things that you'll hear about in the news, but you might not know that Western Uganda is also being flooded right now. There are refugees there who have had to leave their homes starving in camps in the middle of a raging pandemic with the whole country on lockdown. Not only that, rain caused landslides in Dili in Timor-Leste recently and in Indonesia. And you may know that Kiribati, an island in the Pacific, has the dubious honor of being the first nation to be obliterated by climate change if we don't act soon, at the hands of sea level rise, bringing salt into its freshwater supply and eventually submerging it beneath the ocean. And I don't need to tell you that we had catastrophic apocalyptic fires in this very nation not too long ago. So all of this is happening now. This is the situation we find ourselves in today. But is this it? Is this just our new normal now? Do we have to just put up with an extreme weather event every 6 months or so, hear some sad news every so often? Or is it going to change? Is it going to get a lot worse? Well, according to such radical institutions as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the US military, no, it's not going to stay like this. It's going to get a lot worse. And in fact, we spoke to eminent climate scientist Will Steffen this week, who used to be on the Climate Commission here until Tony Abbott shut its doors, and often publishes on the subject. He told us that on our current trajectory, we're looking at hell on earth. So what does that look like? We saw empty shelves during COVID, people going for runs on toilet paper and pasta. But then the shelves were stocked again. Imagine just being told that they weren't coming back, that this or that food item will never be stocked again, or at least not for months or years. We've all lived through hot days, but imagine living through that Canada heat wave year in, year out, every summer. And what would you do to feed your family? What would you do to keep them cool? Would you stay here? Would you run for somewhere safe? What about the other people? What would they do? Because the commonly understood aspects of the climate crisis, like sea level rise, they've got these knock-on effects that sometimes we don't understand. But sea level rise is probably the first thing we heard about with the climate crisis. But what we've got to understand is it's not just the shoreline moving back at the coasts. It's about salt water getting into our fresh water supply and making it impossible to grow food. Extreme weather is not just about the initial deaths and damage that's caused. Weeks of rain will rot crops. Weeks of drought will starve them. Temperature rises are not just about needing to go swimming more often or finding the air conditioning. Heat kills. As we saw in Canada, where there were 100 people dying. I read in a paper recently that a heat index of 55 degrees Celsius is the point at which human flesh begins to cook. And these sorts of things don't have to last long to have massive impacts. 1 or 2 years of bad harvests create famines. 2 or 3 weeks of 55 degree plus temperatures kill millions of people who don't have access to proper cooling facilities or the like. So we hear a lot about different levels of degrees of warming, right? 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. But we often don't really understand what this would mean. Let's talk 2 degrees. There was a paper published last year called The Future of the Human Climate Niche. Human climate niche is just sort of the range of temperatures that we can subsist in. And explains that a 2 degree global rise is something of a fig leaf because that's a 2 degree global rise. 70% of our globe is water. So they had a look at the figures and asked, what does that look like on land? And they found that a 2 degree global rise means 7 degree rise on land. This is averaged around the world. We may not experience that here every day, right? But what it means around the world is that at present, 1% of the world is at a 30 degree average temperature. That's taking into account nights. 30 degrees average temperature. That 1% is like the Sahara and places like that. Under this 2-degree scenario, we are looking at 20% of the land surface of the world being at that 30-degree level, that Sahara level. You can't live in those places. We saw in the Canada heat waves that the electrical cables for the tram network just melted. They couldn't run transport. Refrigeration will be impossible at a large scale. And so people are going to move. You have a gigantic refugee crisis, well beyond the scale of anything we've seen today. We have conflict over resources. And in times of conflict, we know that men die and women get raped. In the Syrian civil war, which began with drought driving people into the cities to seek work and food, and eventually standing up for their rights against the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, the Assad regime leveled cities and attacked its own citizens with chemical weapons to stay in power. And you might think that's just something that happens in Syria, but when the rest of the world is facing the pressures that they are under, what would our regime do to stay in power? We talk about the refugee crisis today, and we see in India and in America under Trump, walls going up to keep people out. But with these compounding crises, as we suffer fires and drought and floods more and more, perhaps we will be the refugees. And given the way that we've treated refugees coming into this country, what sort of welcome do you think we'll get? So, what are we doing about it? What's our global social economic system, liberal, enlightened, international order doing about it? We have the Paris Agreement. Everyone know the Paris Agreement? Heard of the Paris Agreement? 2015, a bunch of bigwigs get together and they're like, well, how do we sort this out? And they agreed that they're all going to get together and we're going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Or, close enough. Cut forward 5 years, an article comes out in The Conversation, and I quote from 3 leading scientists at the Paris negotiations: "We struggle to name any climate scientist who at that time thought the Paris Agreement was feasible. 1.5 was impossible in 2015 when that agreement was signed. Why? Because they didn't want to lose their jobs. And I quote, "We didn't want to rock the boat." So when you hear scientists talking about the climate, when you hear establishment figures talking about the climate, you've got to bring them back by 5 years or so. Because we still live in this world where everyone's got their head in the sand pretending like things are just going to carry on the way that they are, and that their most important priorities are their careers and their reputations. We've got the COP26 UN negotiations this year. And you can bet that in 5 years, someone is going to write an article saying that there wasn't a single scientist at COP26 who thought we had any carbon budget, even though we are sure to see many discussions over just how much carbon we have left to burn. We're out of time. David King, who was chief scientist of the UK, advisor to Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, retired now, so he doesn't have to protect his job, says that the next 3 or 4 years will decide the future of humanity. Because here's the really bad news. In the climate system, we have tipping points after which things accelerate, and we can't go back. The Amazon rainforest, known as the lungs of the earth, is now a net producer of carbon emissions rather than a carbon sink due to deforestation and logging and fires. And it's said that if this process continues much longer, recovery of the Amazon will be impossible. The Greenland ice sheet is now on track to cross a tipping point in the near future, if it hasn't already, whereby even if we stop warming right, and there are many more of these tipping points to look forward to in the future. One that scares the shit out of me is that major ocean currents are slowing down. These major ocean currents that distribute heat around the world, that drive our ocean system, they're slowing down. We have no idea how to restart them if they stop. So it's not just about shutting down coal plants anymore. This is the nasty reality. At the top levels, and we heard from Roger Hallam, founder of Extinction Rebellion recently, he was in discussion with some scientists at Harvard who were talking about covering 3% of the world's surface with mirrors to reflect some of this heat back. It's looking more and more likely that large-scale geoengineering solutions will be not just ideal but required. 3% of the world's surface, for reference, is all of India and all of the Sahara. And those scientists are not really talking about who's going to clean the mirrors. So these tipping points are absolutely crucial to avoid, because once they pass, we can't go back. And we've faced crises like this as a species before, right? We had World War II, a war to end all wars. But we knew then, as horrible as it was, that if we didn't stop the Nazis in 1945, well, maybe we could stop them in 1946. But it doesn't work like that with the climate. If we don't stop this in the next 3 or 4 years, as Sir David King tells us, we are risking the future of humanity. It's a binary. We either have a habitable planet, or we don't. And so when we're thinking about this and thinking about what we do about it, it's the same binary. We either get the change that we need, or we don't. And up to now, the environmental movement has demonstrably failed. Petitions and one-day marches, even Extinction Rebellion, so far has not managed to get the change that we need, clearly, with emissions rising year on year. And I'm not saying this to be accusatory, I'm just giving an objective reading of the situation. We're not where we need to be, and we need to get there fast. And so we're here tonight to talk to you about what is necessary to get there. It's like a ball has gone up in the air, and you've got to be standing in the right place to catch it. The ball's going to land here. We need to be standing here. No matter how noble it may be to be standing here, no matter how good it may make us feel, no matter how much of our guilt it may exculpate, if we don't catch the ball, then we may as well have stayed home. So I'm going to turn you over to Andy now to talk to us about how we can catch that ball.
All right, so we are in an escalating crisis. We don't have the luxury of pure critique, of waiting for a better idea to come along. We are here now. We've got to do what we think is the best thing at this point in time to catch this ball. We have to take risks, and I would say very clearly we have to be courageous. We have to step out of our comfort zones, and we have to take responsibility. I don't know about you, but I'm very, very sick of conversations in cafes about how fucked it is, or about how Australia is becoming more and more authoritarian. It doesn't help to just talk about it, you know? I mean, it's a start. It is a start, but it's not how we're going to solve this situation. So we're here in Australia. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it's quite shocking. Basically, our country, doesn't really represent regular people on a global level. Our country represents the fossil fuel industry. The state has been captured. We're the third largest exporter of carbon after Saudi Arabia and Russia. And it's very clearly shown in our response globally. For example, there's this development bank in Asia, and Australia lobbied really, really hard so that so that subsidies could go to coal power stations and nuclear power stations in developing countries, right? We have a vested interest in continuing to export fossil fuels, which is going to destroy our planet and our country and our children's future. This is who is in charge, 3 kilometers away. So, I'll give you a story from history. Who here has heard of the Freedom Riders? Cool. So that's a movement, that's part of the civil rights movement in the United States. What was the context of the Freedom Riders? Well, it was segregation in the South, it was racism and violence, and it was a direct threat and a terrible way for people to live. But also, like, now you had people in the North who were, you could say, the reformist paradigm, who were like, no, don't cause disruption, this and that, like, it's bad for the movement, you know? What happened? In 1961, 13 people got on 2 buses and they drove down, they got on these buses and they went down from the north into the deep south. And before they left, they wrote their will and testament, or whatever it's called, their will. They knew that they were potentially facing death, but that's what they were willing to do because of how much they wanted to change the world, because of how gross the injustice was. And so their strategy, right, they had a couple of things going on. On the one hand was a pure moral drive to do the right thing. But also, at this point in time, the President of the United States, JFK, was trying to be an ambassador in the world of like great democratic leadership and all this stuff. But basically what they did was they knew that they could cause a media sensation and get the eyes of the world on America. It would be a massive reputational blow for the president at that time, and they'd have real leverage. So this is what they said, the organizer. We planned the Freedom Ride with the specific intention of creating a crisis. We were counting on the bigots in the South to do our work for us. We figured that the government would have to respond if we created a situation that was headline news all over the world and affected the nation's image abroad. An international crisis, that was our strategy. So, what is the structural weakness in Australia with our political system at the moment? Arguably, you know, it's clearly pretty entrenched with the fossil fuels. Like we're seeing that the National and Liberal Party, there's a revolving door with the fossil fuel industry, with the media. It seems like, what the hell can we actually do? But at the same time, there is growing international pressure on Australia to join the rest of the world in declaring even a net zero target. We have an election coming up, and we know that they want to get re-elected. And there's also a pretty small prison in ACT, which I'm going to get to later on. But very interestingly, I don't know if you're aware, but there was a federal court case, and the judge ruled that our Environment Minister and the government have a duty of care for people under the age of 18. The first respondent, Susan Lay, has a duty of care in exercise of her powers of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act to avoid causing personal injury or death to persons who are under 18 years of age, ordinarily resident in Australia at the time of commencement of this proceeding, arising from emissions of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere. This is it. This is our law in this country, that there is a duty of care to protect young people from CO2 emissions, right? This is our door. So, if our government insists on exporting fossil fuels and on subsidizing more fossil fuel expansions so that we lock in more fossil fuels in our country and in the developing world, we have to enact in this duty of care that is now legally mandated. We have to uphold this duty of care. Of course, the government is appealing this decision. They're appealing it. They're saying they don't have a duty of care to our young people. And, I mean, maybe it doesn't surprise you, but I think this helps to explain a bit why, The former leader of the Nationals, Michael McCormack, when people are talking about 2050 targets, he says we don't need a 2050 target because the future's a long way off. I'm certainly not worried about what might happen in 30 years' time. And now Barnaby Joyce says, quite a high proportion of us will have passed away. That's the only thing certain about 2050. I mean, it's obvious, right? These guys do not give a fuck about anything but themselves right now and the industries that they represent. So, once again, it's up to us. And you might know what's coming next, but basically we have to engage in non-violent civil disobedience. It's our duty, it's our responsibility, it's what's right, and it's what's got the best chance of actually affecting change. And what that means is causing disruption. It means people prepared to make a sacrifice. It means we do something that will get millions of conversations happening in this country and ideally around the world so that we can leverage the international condemnation and force some concessions from our government. So what happens, right? Like, we know the COP negotiations are the start of November. We have 2 weeks of sitting in Parliament in October. The second week starts October 25th. October 23, we are beginning a protest camp on the lawns of Parliament called Reclaim Our Future. And we're inviting everybody, particularly parents, children, grandparents, to come there and to be prepared to take part in civil disobedience day after day, to be prepared to be arrested and to go back out, to go to court, tell the judge, I am not breaking the law by doing this. I am upholding our duty of care to the children. You either have to drop these charges or I'm not going to comply with this broken system, and don't sign your bail papers and you can end up in the AMC prison, and we can flood that prison and we can force the ACT government to go into rebellion against the federal government, or at least force some serious extra fractures in our system, because there's only one prison in ACT. And if you don't go into prison, then you come out and you go again and cause disruption. And people will go. We know what they say. They say, those guys are a bunch of idiots. What are they doing blocking the roads? What are they doing graffitiing Parliament House? What are they doing blocking the airport? But they'll say they've got a point. Our bloody government is pretending it doesn't have a duty of care to the children of this country. Now, I have mentioned prison, and obviously it's an incredibly privileged thing to be able to choose to go to prison. A lot of people end up in prison unfairly as well in this country. We know that there's a 3% Indigenous population in this country, and we have 29% incarceration of Indigenous people, which people here who've been to the prison have seen that firsthand and know that that is the case here. And also what people in the women's side of the prison were in there for was Centrelink fraud and drug offences, So like the prison system is not necessary. There's a 50% recidivism for prisons in Australia at this point in time. So the system isn't necessarily working as it is. But we have a lot of privilege. If you're starving, you cannot go on hunger strike. People in the global south can't choose whether or not they fight back to survive, or whether like a cyclone comes and destroys their place like the Dominican Republic. They don't have that choice, It's so privileged to sit back and just let it happen and think like, I'm just gonna let somebody else deal with it, because we know the government isn't gonna deal with it. Like, it is up to us. And also in talking about prison, there's also another side, which is a dignity of risk, because everybody has different risks in thinking about these consequences. But it's up to individuals to take as informed consent, to have as much information as possible, and to consider the outcomes for themselves. But basically, we have to do this. October 23rd, day after day, week after week, national mobilization here in Canberra. And to get there, we have a warm-up in the start of August, because the thing is, we need to grow a big courage muscle for the movement, and we need to show what people are willing to do and inspire others to be there with us in October, prepared to do this. So currently, we have some actions that are being planned, and we have about 10 people who are prepared to go prepared to like cause disruption and face the consequences of that disruption. And so we're asking people to well, I'll leave the ask to Violet, but basically there is something coming soon as well as October. And there's a pathway for everybody here to get there if they're willing. And I just want to finish by saying that not all of Canberra is in here. It would be a bit bigger room to have all of Canberra here. You know, you could blame it on promotions, but you people are here in this room now. And so, like, it's not rhetorical, it's just the fact that you are the people in this room getting this message, and you can make a very big difference in the actions that you take. Do you want to take it?
All right, so I'm going to ask you all to go on a march with us and sign a petition. No. All right, so I guess I want to preface this in saying that we don't want to have to do this. I don't want to have to ask you this. I don't want to be here. I want to be a mum. I want to be at home raising a baby. I can't do that because who would bring a baby into this world? So that's why I'm here, and that's why I dedicate my life to this. And I'm sorry to have to ask you this, but please come to prison with us, because the habitability of our planet's at stake. And as Andy said, that the way this works is that you know, people need to build that courage muscle. So during the budget week, you might have seen the actions that we did the budget week, where we had trucks around Parliament House. I made a call out through Extinction Rebellion for people to come to prison with me then. Leslie was the only person who responded. And so we went to prison for a week at AMC, and we'll tell you a little bit about what that was like. And then now, because we did it and we've talked about it, we now have, it's actually, I think 14 or 16 people actually willing to go to prison in August, but some of them are trapped in lockdown, which gives even greater responsibility to people in this room, because you're here and other people can't be, to keep our community safe. So some of us will go to prison in August for 10 days. And then after that, we'll go out and give talks like we're giving to you now. And then get 60, 80, 100 people into prison in October, depending on COVID, probably. Now, I also want to say that, you know, this is really peanuts compared to what people have done throughout history to protect us and our freedom. And it's not just our freedom at stake, it's our very lives. So, yeah, really ask yourself, what are you willing to do to protect that? And, yeah, I guess there's 3 kind of levels to this. Not everybody can go to prison. As we've said, we've got a lot of privilege. Some people don't have the privilege that I have. So there's being willing to come to actions, being willing to participate in non-violent direct action. And so I'm just gonna, it's not a binding contract, but I'm just gonna ask you now, who in this room is willing to come and participate in direct action with us? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And again, not a binding contract, but who here would be willing, after hearing this talk, to get arrested? Yeah, thank you. And out of those people, who'd be willing to go to prison? Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break out into little groups and just have a little talk about what we've heard and share and be a community. We'll break into 3 groups with facilitators. And I just want to say, the other way that you can really help is by donating to the rebellion and donating proportionately. So you might normally donate $20 to councils or things that help, but if you can donate $200, $500, $1,000, it costs a lot of money to do a rebellion, and it costs a lot of money to pay the fines. So if you can't be on the streets, and even if you can, please donate to us as well.
Okay, I'm Leslie, and I'm very privileged to know these 3 amazing young people.
I'm just going to hook this to you.
Oh,
Sorry about
thank
that.
you. Who give their all, and I mean their all, to this cause. As soon as I found XR, I went, that's for me, because I've always had a huge admiration for the suffragettes and the Salt March people and the people who have risked so much for political freedom, for the right to vote, for women's rights, for nationhood. And I've studied this, I've read a lot about it in the last few years, and it always makes me wonder why. Why do they do it? Why do they put their life on the line for this stuff? And I realise it's because it's the right thing to do. It can't be that's the only common factor in it all. So knowing that it's the right thing to do, when Violet said, who wants to come to prison? I went, I will, much to my family's horror. Prison was fine. I mean, look, I know prisons can be dangerous places and people are hurt in them and they get traumatised in them. I'm a middle class, middle-aged woman. I've had a life. I've been had a few knocks and bumps and bruises, as most of us this side of 50 can I see lots of nodding heads. It was fine. It was like the worst school camp you've ever been on. Yeah, there was a strip search, but it wasn't invasive. They were doing their job. They were very professional. You get locked in your cell for 22 hours a day. I'm an introvert. To me, that was heaven. I did a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, finally got some books out of them so we could read. We had writing materials. We were warm. We had TV. We had radio. We are not spending 25 years like Nelson Mandela did, And I'm particularly interested in talking to a lot of you in this room who are like me, careers behind us maybe. Don't have to worry about whether we're going to get a sack at work if we do something like this, whether we're going to get into that course of study we want to do. I felt it was my duty because I have benefited from the obscene waste of resources and the way that we've treated this planet. I have a 6-year-old grandson and I want him to have a decent life. But I have a choice. I have to do the most significant thing I can do. And that was it. And the idea of just going to prison, well, what's that going to prove? Nothing if I just do it on my own. But 2 of us went, and now we've got, I reckon we'd be close to 15, 16 who are putting their hands up, but of COVID we've been knocked back a bit. We will get more people in October.
40 for October.
Yep. We have, I can't be complicit anymore. And I'm sorry, but I love environmentalists. They work so hard. We try everything. We go on the marches. We put in all the work. It's just not working. They're just laughing at us. Do your little thing. We don't care. We're just going to go off and do what we want to do. Keep Mr. Murdoch happy. Keep the coal barons happy. It's not impacting them. We're not causing them any distress. We're not embarrassing them. So we have to up the ante. I don't know another way. I wish there was another way. I'm going to weaponise my privilege and go to prison to save other people who shouldn't go to prison because they'd be victimised and mistreated in there. I think that will assuage some of the guilt I feel for having allowed it to get to this point during my lifetime. And I'm happy to answer questions about prison, because people often want to know things like, medication and all those practical things, which we are running some information sessions about that. But when we break into little groups, we'll do. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
I won't go over all the wonderful things that these people have said. I'll just say I feel exactly like you. I feel as though this generation of humans, this year, next year, for the next few years, determine the fate of the human race. There's no second group coming along who'll do a better job than us. It's got to be happening in the next 3, 4, 5 years, and we're the people who have to do it. The thought of getting arrested and being in jail is shocking for me, and my friends are saying, Margaret, you're not going to go to prison, are you? And I think the suffragettes did. They were I'm respectable. I'm highly respected in the community. I was a school principal. I have status. What am I doing thinking of going to prison? But like the suffragettes, I don't have an option. About 2.5 years ago, after Labor lost the unlosable election, I was devastated, my family were devastated, our household was just flat. And my 10-year-old son came in to me. He knew I'd been out handing out how to vote cards all day. He came in and gave me a good hug and said, "Thank you, Grandma." And then he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and he said, "We're all going to die, aren't we, Grandma? What do you say?" All I could say was, "Look, I don't think we are. We've got to make sure we don't. And I will be doing everything I can, everything in my power to work to make that happen, the change. And I'm nobody. What can I do? But there are hundreds and thousands of little me's around the planet. And if we all do our bit, maybe we will just pull it off. Maybe."
No one like you, Margaret.